Hey everybody, I am Monica Guzman and I'm trying to figure out if I am using the right microphone. I see my dots moving, so I think I should be okay. So, hi again. Hope you all had a good week. Um, I am still getting my bearings on this live streaming stuff. I think I'm going to end up using the rest of May over the weekends, nights, to just kind of keep practicing, keep figuring out how to read my notes while looking at the camera and all that good stuff. So tonight, I'm continuing my Cap Anson series. I read his book, which was published in 1900. It's his autobiography that did have a ghostwriter, but nonetheless, it's from his perspective and his memories and him telling the story of his career and stuff that related to it. So I divided up his book into 5 topics that I found interesting. So far I've talked about American bloodlines, and then I talked about what he wanted for his daughters. And today I'm talking about gambling slash betting as it was happening during the early American baseball days. And so I'm talking about the gambling was occurring within the sport from the 1860s all the way through about 1915, because I'm also bringing in A.G. Spalding's perspective on the gambling that was happening in baseball at that time. This is definitely before Babe Ruth put the Yankees on the map. Um, and I feel like it's important because, okay, so betting and gambling on sports has probably existed since sports started to be played in the United States, right? Like, and I imagine that if you end up watching my channel, you probably also watched Michael Jordan's Last Dance. So we all know now, without a shadow of a doubt, that he participated in his fair share of gambling. But I believe Jordan's gambling was outside of the NBA, right? He wasn't betting on the NBA, and there was no legal betting on the NBA during his era. So right now, there is a strong push from MLB itself to legalize gambling or sports gambling across the United States. We all know that I believe the first legalized gambling outside of Nevada, I believe, took place in New Jersey. And New Jersey is sketchy, right? There are some interesting political things that happen in that state. One of their representatives is essentially pushing to delegitimize the Supreme Court. So there's definitely a lot of sketchiness and shadiness coming out of New Jersey. And it's basically spreading throughout the country. I mean, you guys think California is bad. I mean, we've got our issues in California, but definitely New Jersey leads the way in sketchiness in any, you know. So, so I guess Rob Manfred, MLB's commissioner, came out and publicly stated that MLB wants legalized sports gambling across the United States. So he wants it at the federal level. I think they're pushing, again, for it to become federal law as opposed to state by state by state. And so what I'm gearing toward is building a case for showing everybody that what's happening in America, what's happening in baseball, MLB, is a clash of cultures. I'm gonna bring up Nick Fuentes being put on the no-fly list again because again, Americans on their own soil are being called terrorists, which is insane. Um, but that can only happen because Americans no longer run America. America is being run by a completely different regime, and they're not American. I just something I've been thinking about, and I'll dig into a little bit more after May, is the original Americans could have very easily written into the Constitution, you can't criticize us, right? You foreigners, you can't criticize us. The original Americans very easily could have written into the Constitution that non-Americans can't criticize Americans on American soil. So they could have put in a censorship clause, and they didn't. So it's very interesting that non-Americans on American soil are trying to censor Americans. So it's quite obvious who stands for free speech and who doesn't. The people pushing censorship are obviously not free speech advocates. So that's something I'm going to dig into going. Again, this will be later on after May, but I found it extremely interesting when that light bulb went off for me personally. So let's get back to Adrian Constantine Anson, also known as Cap Anson. And the reason why I chose him was because I found his book, first of all, and I added it to my reading list during the lockdown. So I spent my lockdown going about my daily life. But I also made sure to really dig into American baseball history since I had the opportunity and I was able to. A lot of it you can find digital too. There is one book I purchased. I don't have it nearby, but in a future stream, I kind of want to talk about it a little bit because the people that I purchased it from gave me a discount, and they also sent me a note that is a blessing. And so sometimes you've got to say, hey, man, I was meant to be the owner of that book. Or at least one of the owners, because it's a first edition. So obviously it's had other owners. But I found it, the timing was good for something. And again, they gave me a discount on it. So I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, so let's go back to Cap Anson because I'm on a couple of tangents today just to kind of round out the topic and to make it relevant to other things that are happening in America today, namely what's happening in MLB and their push to legalize sports gambling at the federal level. And again, how it impacts Americans given what's going on in the country. We know that mental health issues have increased. We know that addiction issues, degenerate TDs have increased. We know that alcoholism is increasing among millennials. We know just a lot of bad stuff, right? And again, these things are being caused by non-Americans. Americans didn't put in a censorship clause into their own constitution, and they could have. So there's a clash of cultures happening as I speak, right? And Cap Anson, talks about his perspective on what was happening in gambling at that point. And then A.G. Spalding went into a little bit more detail in his, because he was the main advocate for helping to eradicate gambling in American baseball from the gambling that was happening in American baseball from the 1860s through about 1915. Okay, so just like Jordan, Cap Anson wasn't innocent in the sense that he also participated in his share of gambling. He participated, I believe it was horse racing, gambling, because he wrote that he talked to his wife about it, and he let her know that yes, he was placing bets. He always told her the truth about betting, and I believe his betting was horse racing and pool rooms were a big thing in the late 1800s. That's like, I mean, what's the equivalent of that today? Just going to, I mean, do pool rooms to that extent still exist? I'm not personally sure, but I guess maybe, right? So Cap Anson isn't innocent either, in the sense that, again, he participated in his share of gambling too. We all know about Pete Rose. As a manager, he participated in some sort of gambling and betting. So the thing is, and I'm not going to break into an excuse, I want to just point out that men who perform at extraordinary levels vibrate on a different level. They're just different. Greatness requires, you can't be average when you're great. So average people do things and they can't get away with them because they don't perform at a higher level. Again, if you watch The Last Dance, you know that Jordan definitely vibrates on a different level, and it's a higher level than the average person. Pete Rose also vibrated on a different level, right? He was amazing at the plate. And I took a look at the ballpark that he played in, and I don't believe that the ballpark helped him get more hits. So I don't believe we can make up excuses or people who want to lessen. Cap Anson obviously vibrated on a higher level because he was an extraordinary baseball player. Another man vibrates on a different level is Tom Brady. I personally don't know if he has vices. I mean, I think we can all agree that he's the real life version of a Ken doll, right? He's just he has very few flaws, I think. I mean, again, I kind of, if he has flaws, I kind of don't want to know about them because I think, again, Tom Brady vibrates on a different level. He's just a great among the greats, right? We all know Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth enjoyed the women. Babe Ruth drank. Babe Ruth smoked. I personally don't know if he gambled and betted. But again, Babe Ruth was literally born to play baseball. Like, science studied Babe Ruth. And I believe that what's happening today with with the engineering that's happening in MLB is an effort to replicate Babe Ruth, which is never going to happen. It's just, the man was literally born to make contact with the ball and hit it out of the ballpark. It's insane, but it happened, and there's only one Babe Ruth, never going to be replicated, or carbon copy or any of that. So, okay, so let's get back specifically to the gambling stuff. So again, Cap Anson wasn't innocent. He participated in gambling and betting, but his gambling and betting was outside of American baseball. He wasn't throwing games. He wasn't betting on baseball teams. It seems like he really stayed away from that aspect of gambling and betting. And he let his wife know that he was putting their money toward that stuff. So the pool rooms in large cities is where the betting and the gambling was taking place at that time. Now, what really became an issue in American baseball at that time, and again, I'm talking about the late 1870s, 1800s, is that players were being paid to throw games. We all know about the Black Sox scandal. Again, I don't know my audience. For some reason, right now, I'm assuming that if you're dropping in to watch the stream, you already know that I'm talking American baseball history. So sorry about that, but my angle is American baseball history and how it intersects with America. So the players were throwing games. The players were actively participating in the betting and gambling aspect of American baseball in the late 1800s. And that's actually one of the things that led to the birth of the National League. Several players were dismissed because there was an effort to eradicate gambling and betting from American baseball. Because what was happening is the fans were losing faith in the game. So they're watching this game, and I guess some of them knew that the players were throwing games on purpose or were participating in the gambling some way. And so the fans lost faith in the results, kind of like the way I've lost faith in MLB, where I used to watch these games, and again, I go back to 2017 World Series and the 2018 World Series, where to this day, I understand what the Houston Astros did, and I'm not going to defend, I'm not going to make excuses for those guys. For example, Jose Altuve is getting a lot of grief right now. I think Houston was in New York against the Yankees a couple days ago, and Yankees fans really let them have it, especially Jose Altuve. To me, he was part of it, and his legacy is tainted. Therefore, don't even bother making a Hall of Fame case for him. It's done. He's tainted. He's tainted, and it. I guess Yankees fans forget that a lot of their championships under the Steinbrenner era is tainted too, because at least 26 steroid users have gone through the Yankees organization under Cashman. So I get why Yankees fans want to take out their frustration on the Astros, but at the same time, the Yankees under the Steinbrenners isn't that much cleaner. So, I mean, okay, it is what it is, right? So my contention is that Andrew Friedman and Farhan Zaidi lost the World Series for the Dodgers in 2017 because I don't believe the Astros were banging trash cans at that time. The first game was of the 2017 World Series, first with Chris Taylor hitting that insane home run, right? And then Kershaw dominating the Astros in that first game. I think it was like the shortest game in a long time in a postseason game. Kershaw just dominated through 7 innings, right? And then they brought in 2 relievers. So the LA Dodgers at that time had their cleats on the neck of the Houston Astros. And I believe that it freaked out MLB because what if the Dodgers had swept the Astros? Now, that wasn't going to happen because I personally didn't believe that the Dodgers were going to go to Houston and mow down the Astros. I thought it was impossible. But I did think that the Dodgers were going to win in 6 games. I believe that the Dodgers could have taken game 1 and 2, lost game 3, taken game 4, lost game 5, and then won game 6, at least. But then Rich Hill was taken out early, and that just threw off the rhythm of the games. And the rest is history. The Dodgers lost. The Dodgers pulled the same, at least Farhan and Friedman pulled the same trick in 2018, pulling Rich Hill after Puig's insane home run. So I personally just stopped watching because what's the point of watching these games if I don't believe that the results are legit? Sensed it, and they made a forceful effort to clean up what Cap Anson calls the crookedness among players, and then just the general betting and gambling stuff. And A.G. Spalding succeeded. In 1911, there was a court case where that specific case against those specific men, they couldn't prove that they had gambled, but the judge apparently said something that as soon as they found evidence and they brought it, the judge would rule in favor of American baseball trying to get rid of gambling. And again, Americans in the early 1900s are a lot different than the Americans of today in the sense that I'm going to say up until I'm going to take it all the way to the 1940s. I'm going to say that Americans through the 1940s were still very protectionist. So what A.G. Spalding was doing was protecting Americanism. This is the time that they called, was it the Gilded Age, where Americans were exporting their culture. So when American baseball went on that world tour, it was Americans playing American baseball abroad. They were exporting American culture, as opposed to today where the last time they did this, right, they played that series in London. But the teams, the makeup of the teams is very different. They're not 100% American anymore. So you're not exporting American, MLB isn't exporting American culture anymore. They're attempting to export their version of baseball, but they're not. Yeah. That world tour in the late 1800s that was led by Cap Anson and A.G. Spalding and a couple of other men, the purpose was to export baseball and American culture. So those guys, again, up until, I think I'm stretching it a little too far, but up until about the 1940s, Americans were still very protectionist of their culture and their country, unlike today, what's happening. Okay, so back again to the gambling. Okay, so Cap Anson didn't want to name the names of the players that were expelled from baseball, but he had a few comments Let me pull those up. Said, okay, so this is around 1875. He says that it was not all smooth sailing for the promoters of the game. In the many pool rooms then existing throughout the country, and especially in the larger cities, great sums of money wagered on the result of the various contests, and as a result, crookedness on the part of various players were being charged. And though these charges were vigorously denied by those interested, the denials carried but little weight in view of the in and out performances of the teams in which they were engaged. So there was also a lack of discipline. And I know one of the things that Cap Anson gets criticized on, or his detractors defend their anti-Cap Anson point of view, is they say, well, his team, when he was manager, his team didn't respect him. And I think I've found out why that is, and I'm not covering that today. But so he believed there was a lack of discipline among players because they were participating in the betting and the gambling too. Something that was said back in those days was, a crooked jockey is always broke. And that held true regarding the players also. He didn't mention the names of the players. He felt that it wasn't necessary. But basically, I guess he's saying is they got what they deserved by getting kicked out, because now they had to go make a living somewhere else. And even at that time, being a baseball player, you got paid pretty well for doing something that was enjoyable. So he reiterates that it wasn't idle hearsay. So these players weren't dismissed through idle hearsay. There was proof that these men, or these baseball players, were directly participating in the betting and the gambling and the throwing of the games. And it was hurting the game. It was hurting the sport. Because again, people were losing faith in the results. And that makes sense, right? That's one of the things that has impacted me. I don't believe that the results of baseball games are legit anymore. And I lean on the 2017 World Series and the 2018 World Series. The 2019 World Series, I can't be overly critical in the sense that I am happy that Max Scherzer got a ring. I'm happy for him. You know, he's had a long career. It seems like whatever injuries were ailing him in 2019 and 2020, I don't want to, it's weird how baseball kind of makes you, it brings out whatever superstitious side you've got, right? Like, it's like if I go back to when I was in high school, we were forced to read John Steinbeck. I believe The Pearl is one of his books, and it's that whole thing about if you hope for it too much, it doesn't have a pearl inside, right? Like, so I feel like, I guess it's like some people get upset at broadcasters who talk about the perfect game while it's happening, or they talk about the no-hitter as it's happening, the jinx. So Max Scherzer seems to be healthy this season, and I think that's great. He's a great pitcher, and he's showing it this season. So good for him. I'm glad that he has a ring. However, the other side of that coin is Greinke was having a phenomenal game 7, and I mean, I want Greinke to end up with a ring too. And I believe that if Greinke hadn't been pulled, I think that the Astros could have easily gotten their second ring, and that Greinke would have been the World Series MVP, because the performance that he was having was just outstanding. And I mean, it wasn't Madison Bumgarner outstanding, but it definitely was pretty badass, right? So him getting pulled, what was it? Was it the 7th inning? Was just wrong. And let's say Greinke couldn't have pulled it through. Well, we would have, I mean, I think Greinke would have been all right. He was having an outstanding game. And so what they did to Greinke in 2019, the World Series 2019, spills over into what happened in the World Series 2020. First of all, it wasn't legit. I mean, Cashman doing the opener thing with the kid pitcher was shady. And what happened to the Yankees after that game, where was it Hap? The pitcher that was used as a scapegoat after Pedro Martinez and all those guys made such a to-do about that pitcher that got pulled after the first inning. Again, everything is just shady. And so it spills over into what happened in 2020. Blake Snell has a resume of injuries, so I am tending not to be an advocate for guys who have a history of injuries anymore, because it's too much of a trend. These injuries, these injured bad. It's too much of a trend. Okay, so let me go back now to, let's get back to the gambling side together. And okay. Yeah, the internet goes in and out. Sorry about that. So let's get back to the gambling. Again, because everything's tied together. So let me stay in the present. So MLB is advocating for sports gambling legalized at the federal level. So they're all in on the gambling. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, Americans running American baseball did everything they could to eradicate. Not only did they eradicate gambling and betting, they went as far as games on Sundays weren't played and no alcohol was sold on site. So, okay, here's another tangent. As I was waiting for DJ LeMahieu to re-sign with the Yankees this offseason, it took way too long. And I'm not sure if it was Cashman trying to build up something for the MLB media to talk about, but it just took way too long. As soon as the World Series for 2020 was over, he should have been signed. Okay, but he wasn't. So I stopped watching sports talk shows somewhere in the fall of last year. And I wanted to know what was happening with DJ LeMahieu and his contract. And the only way I could think of to really get a sense of what was happening was to listen and read the New York media because they're pretty aggressive over there, right? Um, and so I started listening to the Michael K show. Um, it must have been January. And I stopped listening to the Michael K show when spring training started. And the reason was Michael K was calling the Yankee spring training games, and the Michael K show without Michael K didn't really do it for me. And so that's my personal perspective, my personal taste. I'm not going to apologize for it, but that's my opinion. And at that time, DJ LeMahieu got his contract. So I stopped listening. So now I'm back to no sports talk shows. So the show was entertaining, but internet down, or is your connection? I'm not sure if I should keep talking because I'm still new to this. I will find out what happened at this point when I rewatch it out. And okay, so the message is gone, and I'm gonna keep talking. So while I was listening to the Michael K show, there was actually a commercial that I heard twice on two different occasions. And it stood out to me, again, it ties. The commercial stated that, you know what, even if the game sucks, if you're gambling, the game's going to be interesting to you. And that really stood out to me because of what's happening in MLB with the extra inning stuff. And I did take a quick look before while I was getting ready for this tonight. And so extra inning games in MLB range from 7% to 10%. So every season, there's anywhere, let's see, there's anywhere between 7.7% and 10% extra inning games. So out of the, I think, 1,462 games or something, up to 10% of those will be extra inning games. So I'm following MLB on the app because I'm following how my favorite baseball players are doing. And the way I do it is I check the app for the updates. So sometimes I happen to check right when DJ LeMahieu's at bat, or I'll remember that Mad Bum or Greinke are pitching, and I try to check in to see how they're doing because I'm still rooting for those guys. And so while I'm scrolling around, I'll notice sometimes that there are extra inning games, and I'm not sure if, because I'm paying attention to it, if there really are more extra inning games happening right now, or if it just feels that way, like it's all going to balance out when the season ends. So extra inning, there's a big push from MLB. From comments that I've seen on social media, I don't believe that MLB is selling it as fan engagement. Constructing the narrative, right? Oh, it's fan engagement. More people are going to watch. Da, 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 da. Okay, so that's how they're selling it. Yankees fans at a game earlier this season, it may have been in the beginning of the season, one of their games went into extra innings, and there were fans chanting, "Play real baseball." So they weren't happy about the runners starting on second base in the 10th inning. Um, so um, I think what MLB is trying to do is combine their push for extra innings with their push of sports gambling legalization at the federal level. I think it's all tied together. And so again, it ties back into the legitimacy of the game itself, or just the legitimacy of MLB. Again, I don't believe it's very legitimate anymore. And I believe this transition that they're making, that's losing people also. I don't think I'm the only one that feels this way about MLB no longer being legitimate. And I believe that the illegitimacy of MLB comes from the gambling perspective, and it's only going to get worse as they dig in deeper into it. But that's their thing, right? Like the rest of us don't have to watch. The players, those, I mean, you guys do the whole brotherhood thing. So I don't know. I think you guys should know that there's people out there who feel for you. Those of you guys that are kind of mired in this stuff happening, like last season, one of the San Francisco Giants uh, didn't kneel when everybody kneeled for their little, what was it? I want to say rope, but it wasn't a rope. Whatever they held, right? And they all kneeled. One of the San Francisco Giants guys didn't kneel, and he was very alone in that. But a lot of people were on his side. So I think some of the players in MLB that don't agree with the direction that the sport's heading in, you should know that people are there for you too, just in case you need that. Okay, so there's this really cool article that got written based on an interview of A.G. Spalding in, let's see, is the date here? No, but the name of the article, I believe it's a New York Times article. The Psychology of Baseball discussed by A.G. Spalding by Edward Marshall. And I believe it had to have been published. Let's see if he gives the date. Yes, New York Times, November 13th, 1910. And let me read to you this paragraph so you can get a better sense of what Americans' perspective was. Because one of the things, again, going back to Michael Kay, the Michael Kay show, Don LaGreca kept asking, or I don't know if Michael Kay did it too, but no, actually, I believe it was Michael Kay who asked on several occasions, is baseball church? Like, why do fans want baseball to be so pristine when other professional sports like the NBA and the NFL aren't very pristine? And so, you know, at that time, I wouldn't have, if he had asked me directly, I wouldn't have been able to answer the question either. But so why do some of us view American baseball as so pristine as church? Well, the reason is because Americans cleaned it up. They got rid of gambling. They got rid of betting. They went as far as getting rid of selling beer on site, and apparently some didn't play games on Sundays. Um, so let me read this. One of the paragraphs in this article by Edward Marshall, I believe this is a quote. The elimination of the betting evil was the cornerstone of the success of baseball as an exhibition game. The fight against it was a fierce one, lasting 4 or 5 years. Then we triumphed. And the cleanest game on earth had been established. No betting, no Sunday playing, no liquor sold upon the grounds. It was a revolution in the world of professional sport. Baseball is the only game in which suits the mighty populace and yet is wholly free from ties to bind it to the gambling and liquor selling element whose aim is to victimize the populace. So this is how gambling, even alcohol, was viewed in the very early 1900s. Now, this is before the Roaring Twenties, and I know Babe Ruth was a larger than life character. So I'm not sure what A.G. Spalding thought of Babe Ruth. I know that the author of that book, that first edition that I purchased, the author, I'm not sure if the subject of the book also viewed it this way, but the author also didn't view the drinking aspect or the Roaring Twenties aspect of American baseball. I'm not sure if the author was a fan of Babe Ruth because, again, Babe Ruth, larger than life character. I mean, talk about a bon vivant, right? And so, okay, order. And let me start pointing out a couple of gambling statistics that I found. These are articles, just online articles from tiny organizations that gather data on the topic of gambling and statistics. So I pulled these statistics also summer 2020. And they found that 1% of adults have a severe gambling addiction. The staggering statistic is that 6 to 9% of young people and young adults have a gambling issue. So almost 10% of the young adult and the young person age bracket has of Gen Xers, blue collar, had their daily beer, let's say, right? Whereas today, the young population engages in binge drinking. So here's another example of the young generation just being lost. And they have issues. They have issues. Gambling is one of them. This fact sheet that I looked at found that ethnic and racial minorities have higher rates of gambling. I believe whenever they gave a gambling pick is when they would run their, if you have a gambling problem, call this number. You can call the number, but there's no treatment for gambling addiction. Almost 97% of gamblers have at least one psychiatric disorder. Those people get put through cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, and drug therapies, but they're to gambling. Like older people go to the casinos, right? They kind of go to spend some time away from home. They go to the buffet. But okay. So an alcoholic is likely to be a gambling addict too. So the two kind of go hand in hand. 80% of Americans gamble on a yearly basis. And so when the number gets up that high, I'm assuming that they're putting in there like people who only bet on the Super Bowl. So maybe that's where that 1/3 comes from also, right? 1/3 recovers without treatment because they're probably just going in on the Super Bowl, I believe is the biggest gambling event. I don't know if the Kentucky Derby's in there, but it has always been big. So I grew up watching television, and I enjoyed rom-com movies, and even in rom-com movies, there have been references to college gambling. So one of the movies that I've watched, for example, is The Wedding Planner with J-Lo and Matthew McConaughey. So the woman, I can't remember the actress's name. I believe her name's Bridget. She is a career woman, and she used to run a gambling ring in college. So this is another example of, if you've never examined your point of view, it's a good idea to do so, because why do you believe what you believe? And so what Scott Adams tweeted out a few weeks ago is your opinion yours, or was it assigned to you? So for example, if you watch rom-coms, even in rom-coms, there's references to college gambling, and they make it look very innocent, right? They've got the woman's empowerment angle going. So okay, so that's just something to put out there. 75% of college students gamble. The risk for addiction doubles in college. 20 to 30-year-olds have the highest gambling problem. Gambling and PTSD. 12.5% of gamblers also have PTSD. Gambling and mental illness go hand in hand. Gambling leads to mental illness, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and the tendency to go antisocial. So again, I'm bringing this up because MLB is selling gambling as fan engagement, a way to increase fan engagement. But at the same time, they're targeting young kids, right? And young kids have a higher tendency to gamble. So when I put all these elements together, I see very nefarious intentions coming to the forefront. It's just shady, because something to think about, if you're a parent of a young child, if you're planning on sending them to college, not only are they being wokeified, there's a risk of them picking up an addiction to gambling. And the consequences of gambling are pretty severe, and they could become more severe as technology makes gambling more mainstream. I personally, I don't plan. I mean, once your kids hit 18, they're adults, right? They're legally entitled to make their own decisions from themselves, but you never stop being their parent. You may not get the phone call from the police anymore letting you know you've got to go pick up your kid because he did X, Y, and Z. But do you want to watch your child go? It's a little dangerous, no? Okay. So let me check a couple more things on Cap Anson. So last time I streamed, I mentioned that in 1880, Cincinnati had to forfeit their season because they sold beer on site and it was prohibited. So in A.G. Spalding's book, again, it's available online in digital form. I downloaded it as a PDF. The name of the book is America's Pastime, and I don't remember when it was published, but I believe it was the early 1800s. And I'm going on an hour in a couple seconds. I want to thank those of you who are coming in and out of the stream. I believe I'm having a couple of internet glitches. I not that much I can do about it. You're kind of relying on whatever's going on with internet at any given time. I believe in California, it's on purpose. These glitches are on purpose. I don't know. I don't remember the reason, but there was an article on Zero Hedge that covered it. So I apologize if the connection comes in and out. But again, thank you for coming in and out of the stream. Those of you who are trying to figure out what I'm doing, I apologize. Giving it a shot. I appreciate that. So in A.G. Spalding's book, chapter 10, he covers 1869 through 70, points out that betting was a problem due to collusion. And again, people lost faith in the results. Players who didn't want to participate in the gambling dropped out. And that's kind of, again, what's happening today. Because MLB is so focused on getting sports gambling legalized at the federal level, I'm sure there's players out there who aren't in agreement with being a part of that. And so it's not just that, it's all the engineering that's happening. I believe happening is guys who just want to be a part of it, okay with it, stay. And so what you end up is you end up with a cesspool of willing participants. In this case, in MLB's case, willing participants in the gambling aspect. Okay. So my point for tonight is that Americans eradicated gambling and betting from American baseball, and it is being brought back it's being brought back by a different community to MLB, and they're pushing it forward. Now, they're selling it under the guise of fan engagement, and MLB is attempting to target the young population. But through these statistics, we see that the young population is the most vulnerable to addiction. And so the game is getting changed for gambling. So the game is being altered so that you can bet on it, right? The extra inning stuff that's happening isn't happening for the good of the game. It's for the good of the game. It's a tactic that people are going to, I imagine they're going to be able to bet on it at a pretty high rate. Because I believe that the Nielsen ratings can be broken down into peak. So during a game, you can see the ups and downs, right? And I believe there was a Sunday night game recently when it peaked, and I believe it peaked because it went into extra innings. So the tactic of getting people to tune in to the moment of who's going to win is working, but that tactic is going to be used for gambling purposes, not for the good of the game. So what happens is, beer wasn't sold at ballparks for a while. I have to double check. So after the selling of alcohol was banned, who brought it back and what year was it brought back? But so there are people out there I've talked to people who have told me that they go to a baseball game specifically to go have a beer. So they're having a beer out in the open. They're not there to watch the game. When I used to go to games, and I grew up going to LA Dodger games, I went, and I believe the people that I went with, we went to watch the game. And now I grew up in a household where there was no smoking, there was no drinking, there were no drugs. So my impulse has never gravitated in that direction. I went to the games to watch the guys play. And even when I was in high school, I've thought about it a little bit more on and off. I kind of wouldn't be surprised if one of my guy friends is out there in analytics, because I some of my guy friends were into math, and I thought about it and I'm like, oh geez, is he out there, trader, as a as an analytics dude? Was he going to the games with us? Was he watching what was the beginning of analytics? I hope not. And so, if you want a little bit more perspective about why some baseball fans, even in 2021, see baseball as church, it's because that's what it was. When the National League rolled around, when Babe Ruth rolled around, the culture, and there was pride in keeping baseball clean. There was pride in no games were played on Sundays. There was pride in alcohol wasn't sold on site at baseball games. There was pride in that gambling didn't enter the sport. I don't know when gambling started in the NBA or the NFL, but baseball is seen as church because that was the culture that was developed by its pioneers. And again, these men, athletes of today who perform at extraordinary levels. And it's not that we make excuses for them. It's just that, at least I personally understand that performing at the level that Michael Jordan performed at is something that most people are never going to experience. And it just takes a different kind of person to do it. I thought of Tom Brady. I don't know if Tom Brady has any vices, but he seems very clean. And maybe he has vices, but they're not gambling, drinking related. Maybe his lies somewhere else. And the way I see it is, for example, the MLB domestic violence suspensions that are allowed to keep playing, the way I see it, because there are people out there who say, I separate the artist from the art. And that's fine. That's your opinion. The way I see it is, who are you hurting? The domestic violence suspensions in MLB hurt somebody else. And when Michael Jordan was gambling, who was he hurting? In my opinion, he was hurting himself. Same thing with Pete Rose. He was hurting himself. Cap Anson, by betting, he shared it with his wife. He let her know what he was doing. I guess he could have potentially hurt his wife if she disagreed with it, but he wasn't hurting his teammates. He was more so hurting himself. And so that's where all these things, and obviously everyone's allowed to disagree with that point of view, but it's my point of view and I stand by it. So again, why do we see baseball as church? That was the culture of American baseball when it was run by Americans. It was built to be pristine. It was designed, it was pushed in that direction. So what's happening right now, I believe it all revolves around the gambling aspect of it. If you're a parent of a child that you plan to send to college or is already in college, check in on them, because these kids are being targeted in college because they're away from parental supervision. And I mean, part of it, I had several years ago, it wasn't an argument, but I definitely struck a nerve with someone at that job. He had already built his career. And I said something, I want to be able to tell my child that he shouldn't do drugs either. And I feel the way to do that is to be clean myself. And for some reason, that struck a chord. So I'm assuming that in his youth or whatever, because he was a father to daughters, he had done drugs. And I don't know if he ever had a conversation with them about not doing drugs. And so do some parents not have these conversations with their kids because they themselves participated in these behaviors that they're trying to prevent for their children? And I understand, but at the same time, these are your kids, and you love them, and you want the best for them. Apologize. You love your kids. So that's for you and them. But I'm saying you love your kids. And whether you use the learn from me angle or hopefully you've developed a relationship with them where you can have these conversations with them and they're not going to push you away. Have these conversations with them and they're not going to push you away. But young adults, kids in college are targets for all sorts of stuff these days. They're being woke up alcohol for degeneracy, hedonistic behavior. So just maybe check in on them and see how they're doing. Okay, so tomorrow night, I'm going to stream again, and I haven't decided on the topic, but it will be Cap Anson because, again, I divided up his book into 5 sections on 5 topics that interested me. And a reminder, one of the reasons why I chose him is because as of 1983, Cap Anson was turned into a villain by individuals involved in MLB. And I disagree with turning him into a villain. He was just an American living on American soil, being an American. And here, several years later, someone decides that Cap Anson is this evil dude. Okay, I don't agree. Okay, I don't agree. So I'm talking about his life and talking about his thoughts and his career and what he did and why I don't think he's a villain. So I've got 2 more topics on Cap Anson to cover. I think next Saturday, I think I'm just going to dive into the reason someone decided to turn him into a villain and why people in MLB have run with it. So that's going to be probably on par with a stream. So tomorrow, I think I want to talk about Cap Anson growing up because it kind of gives a look into the culture of that time and how far away we are with it in today's time. And I gear all this toward guys, helping the guys of today become men, giving them the space or the message, the tools, helping these guys succeed, because I believe society requires strong men. The colonies, America was built by men. It was not built by women. Women were in the background. I know a lot of women did a lot of awesome things, but the founders were men. And that's one of the things that I actually admire about Tom Brady off the field. His diplomacy skills are off the charts. I mean, I wouldn't encourage him to run for office. A lot of the American baseball pioneers did run for office, and a few of them succeeded. I personally, in today's environment, I mean, Tom Brady could run for office, but he's got a family, and why would he put himself through everything that's going to come at him today, right? I mean, hopefully his support would be louder than his detractors, because Tom Brady has a lot of haters, right? But his diplomacy skills are off the charts, and so I feel like he's a really good example. It makes sense that he wins the locker room, right? He figures out how to win the locker room, and then, like Jordan, takes them to the promised championship land, which is just amazing. And so okay, so I lost my train of thought on that one, you guys, and I'm going to do that every so often. Eventually, I think I will try to build a staff. I need to have someone in my ear saying, okay, Monica, you've gone way too far off topic. This is the original try to build a staff. I need to have someone in my ear saying, okay, Monica, you've gone way too far off topic. This is the original topic. Let me remind you, any composers out there, I would like some sort of jingle, some sort of intro song, and then some graphics. The visualization stuff that's going around that gets tweeted on Twitter is pretty cool. I don't want to go that far because, I got some stuff on attention spans that I will get into once I actually get the format of the show going. But so I mean, eventually I will some staff, because this project is a build up towards something I want to do next year. And so I'm hoping that this venture will help me create a couple of partnerships with people for the next step. So we'll see how everything goes, right? You just gotta try it. So tomorrow I want to talk about Cap Anson growing up. And then next Saturday night, I will be back and I'll dive into how some individuals in MLB have tried to turn Cap Anson into a villain, and why I disagree. So tomorrow I'll be back, tomorrow evening. We'll talk about Cap Anson growing up, and then next Saturday, I am going to talk about Cap Anson getting turned into a villain. And then I believe Mother's Day is next Sunday. I want to go back to Cap Anson and his relationship with his wife. I thought about a couple more things that I wanted to add. And so I just think, why not do it on Mother's Day? And then, so that'll be my wrap up on my Cap Anson series. And then from there, we get really close to Memorial Day weekend. I'm sure, after my Cap Anson series, I want to talk about what an American is from the American baseball perspective, because that article by Edward Marshall defines an American. And then A.G. Spalding also defines an American. And then there's obviously the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence that define what an American is. I don't have my book on the Federalist Papers, but there's a really popular one that defines an American. I'm not sure if I'll be able to prepare that specific piece of research. So I'll go into that after my Cap Anson series, and these will all be Saturday and Sunday nights. And then in June, hopefully I'll be prepared to go into my format, which I'm actually planning on switching to the morning. So we'll see how it goes, right? Thank you again, everybody. I appreciate you joining me. Thanks for listening. Thanks for letting me use your ear to practice on. I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a good, I guess we're going into morning in some places. I will see you back here Sunday night to talk a little bit more about Cap Anson. Thank you again. Have a rest of wherever you are, day or night. Talk to you soon. Bye.